Welcome everyone, this is Wrath, and today we're going to be going through the last map of the Enter the Cabal August event quest. This one is called the Master, and we're going to be doing this with a team of 4 stars to show that it's definitely possible. We're going to be going through one of the easier paths. We're going to go through a Rage node, which means you want to be using a lower damage output champion so you don't get those capped at 2.5% and give them the Rage marker. And then we're also going through areas that have Brute Force, which is the hit them within a certain time frame so that way you don't start degenerating. For the most part, you're really not going to change your strategy throughout this fight. The first one that we're going to go through is Howard the Duck. Howard the Duck, really, you're going to use anyone that can turn his armor against him, or you armor break him. So Doctor Voodoo is a great option. He can basically just turn those armor buffs into poison counters. You could also use Magik to convert them basically straight into damage by using your third super. Big thing for Howard the Duck, bait his first super. His first super is very easy to dodge. You dodge back once to dodge the melee attack, and you dodge back again with the projectile. Just remember, again, depending on where you are with that projectile, you'll have to dodge back at a different time. So you want to do it right before it actually hits you, not when it's actually utilized. The other thing that he does is when he gets to a certain percent health, he'll then start doing either a Thunderquack to basically do damage to you or regenerate. To stop those from happening, you're just going to do the same thing as with Ultron. You're just going to parry him to stun him, and those will shut off. Overall, not a very complicated fight. Just take time to bait that first super. Power control also works very well to keep him below the second super. The second super is very difficult to dodge, so you're going to take a little more damage on the shield. Alright, so now we're moving into Blade. For Blade, having someone that is bleed immune is good, because even on a block, he can still bleed you. That's why I chose Iceman. You don't need to be bleed immune for this. It just helps. For Blade, you're going to be doing the basic strategy of attacking him after the end of a combo. You're also going to be doing the parrying strategy and attacking him after the stun. His first super is dodgeable, but it's difficult. So if you're not familiar with it, just take on the shield. It doesn't really matter. The damage output's not that high. The second one is definitely difficult to dodge. So again, I would take on the shield if you're not comfortable with it. With Iceman, if you wanted to, you could push him to the third super as long as you didn't lose ice armor, and then you could take only a small amount of damage because of the ice armor. Overall, though, it's just going to be basically taking the damage on the shield and then doing your combos. It's good if you have someone that can either poison him or, for instance, with Iceman, cold snap him. It'll just make the fight go a little bit faster. But this is completely doable fight with 4 stars. The chip damage isn't going to be that high. The big thing here is that if you do use someone that's not bleed immune, be very careful with getting hit by a super or by one of his combos, because the bleed on it is going to do some severe damage and really kill your champion very, very rapidly. So really, if you don't have a bleed immune champion, don't dexterity his supers unless you're super confident in them. It's better just to take the chip damage. So here also he regenerates when he shields. Just keep that in mind. It's not a huge deal. The regeneration isn't enough to worry about. All right. So now we're going to go to the right. We're going to go to Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus, not exceptionally difficult. First super is the one you're going to try to bait. You can also use power controllers against him to kind of keep him shut down throughout the fight. One thing to note is that you're going to want to either have... You can really fight Red Skull with anybody, but I would say on the team that I have, you want to keep either Magik or Doctor Voodoo to the end. We'll see why in the boss fight. So Magik here, I'm just using her to just kind of power control and make the fight a little bit easier. But if you weren't power controlling, you're going to want to dodge the first super. So kind of bait out that first super. First super, he basically just does a jump attack, and you can dash in right afterwards. The second one you can dodge, but you have to dodge the different rocks that he throws, so it's a little more complicated. First super is a lot easier to deal with. Just remember for him is that his combos appear faster, and his heavy attack is a little harder to tell when it ends. But basically, you're going to attack him right after he does that looping strike. Watch the video a few more times if you missed it, just to get that timing down. He definitely can catch people unaware. It's right, so I didn't even dash in because I wasn't confident on that one. But be very careful with it. You can easily dash in too late or too early, either get hit or be caught basically on your dash in. So just be careful. Again, do the fight very slowly. If you weren't using a power controller, I would suggest basically just baiting that first super over and over again. Bait that first special attack. That's probably the best way to do it. And in case you're watching these videos, if I say super a lot, it's because I play a lot of Destiny as well, and that's what the special attacks are called, but I'll try to mix back in the actual lingo, which is special attacks. Overall, Dr. Octopus shouldn't be too difficult. Again, even with 4 stars, the chip damage is not going to be severe. So if you're walking through these fights just taking chip damage, that's going to be completely fine. You just don't want to get hit by an actual combo or a super. So taking the chip damage is much better than being unconfident and dexterity incorrectly and taking the damage. All right, so now we're going to be fighting Wolverine. You can fight her with a bleed immune if you want, but the big thing here is because of this rage marker, you do not want to give any damage above 2.5%. So this is actually why 4 stars are good, especially ones that have lower damage output per hit. So you want to use someone like X-23, Iceman, Black Panther. They do more damage in terms of their bleeds or their cold snaps, but their base attack isn't that high, which means you're not going to be triggering that fury markers. If you're using 5 stars, you're going to be triggering this a lot more often. So if someone in here is using a high damage output champion, what you're going to have to do is when they get to the 5, it shows on the screen that they're unblockable. When they're unblockable, you're going to basically have to bait first supers, which is the best way to do it, first or second supers, get in afterwards, then use your super to push X-23 to their next super, so that way you can do it again. So basically you're going to utilize their supers to get in and not have to deal with the unblockable. Other strategies would be doing the one where you attack them against the wall and then dash back, dash in, so that way you're not trying to block their attack. Very doable, especially with low damage output champions. For X-23, her first and second super are dodgeable. Just take a look through the video to see what her first and second supers look like, but just make sure you dash in right afterwards. Really, they're not that complicated. And again, she has regeneration, but it's not enough to worry about. I would, again, completely ignore the regeneration. You're not going to have a problem with it. So this is her second super. It ends with that basically spiral kick. Just go in right afterwards. And if you saw that I was using X-23, if you're using X-23 yourself, make sure that you're kind of storing up your super energy unless you're using it to get them to another super bar, so that way your regeneration can be higher. All right, so now I did the incorrect thing here, but if you're going against the Spiderman Symbiont, you should, if you have Iceman, use Iceman. I went a different route, which was not particularly smart. The big thing here is that he doesn't become ability to evade until he uses a super. So I was going for trying to power lock him to keep him down. The problem is that he can do his first super, whereas Magik has to do her second super to power lock. Doesn't quite work. For Spider-Man, you can dodge his first super after the first 2 web blasts. You can dodge it completely if you know what you're doing. His second super is much better to dodge. So here he activates his super, but you can dodge right when the fists come in. So he does 2 web blasts, then a fist attack, and then you can basically dodge when he punches you. Just remember that after he uses his super, he does become the ability to evade, and this is going to be a fair amount of chip damage, so I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to lose an additional champion, just because he does do a fair amount of damage. There you see that strategy, basically catching him against a wall so you can attack him, but I didn't have enough damage. I didn't have enough life left to survive that chip damage. Again, if you lose a champion here, it's not the end of the world. This is probably one of the harder fights in that pathway. But again, if you have someone that's evasion resistant, like Iceman, I would recommend using them for this fight. And that way, so you just fight them like normal. Basically, parry, stun them, and then attack them. Not too complicated on this fight if you have someone that can do evasion resistance, like Iceman. All right. So we're nearing the end of this pathway. So now we're going to go into Sentry. So Sentry, he's not that difficult. His second super is easier to dodge because he basically does this cannonball attack and you're just going to dash backwards a few times to make sure you're out of the way. He has brute force, which basically means you're going to degenerate unless you hit him every 30 seconds. So again, this one I would basically ignore it. Other than if you're doing the second super bait, give him a little bit more time, basically attack him, and then don't go all the way near the third super. That way you can basically hit him again if you start to degenerate. Up in that upper left, you have that countdown timer. It basically will kill you in 30 seconds with degeneration, so you have to make sure that you're hitting him within that timer. Again, here we're trying basic and super. It's that big cannonball attack. You just basically dodge backwards and dodge right back in afterwards. Make sure you look at the timing so that way you don't get caught by it. You just saw the first super there. The big thing to note there is that the first thing you do is dash backwards for his first melee attack. Then you have to dash backwards again for the second beam attack. The problem with the beam attack is that it's a fairly long duration. So if you dodge back too early, you're going to get caught by the tail end of it, which isn't a ton of damage, so it's still okay. But if you just want to guard against it, you can. Or you can just try to make sure you bait it at the correct time. It's a little bit more difficult in the timing-wise. Again, if you have to choose between giving him his third super or taking some degeneration, I would take the degeneration instead. So for the most part, you're kind of ignoring that countdown timer. But other than just make sure that you kind of get in every so often to make sure you're not degenerating over time. But for the most part, this is going to be a slow fight. His heavy attack does have those two components, so don't dash in too early. And you're basically just going to do the pairing strategy. X23 is a great champion for this just because you can kind of regenerate over time. But basically, any 4-star is going to work so far on this entire path. As you saw, this entire path has not been very specific for who you're using. You could really use any 4-star. Basically, just pick your best ones up to this point. The boss is going to be a little different. We'll get into that. So make sure you're choosing your champions appropriately for the boss, and you're going to reserve the ones for the boss that you have that you are going to use for the boss, and basically just kill off everyone else. All right, so we're getting there. It's a little bit longer of a fight. He has a fair amount of health. But again, bait that first super, bait that second super. You can use power controllers if you want to, so that way you can kind of make it a little bit faster, but you're going to want to save most of those power controllers against Red Skull. We'll see why shortly, but you can push through it. I'd also recommend if you're using X23, again, Despair route is great, but for this, you want Deep Wounds and Assassination as well. You're going to get a lot more damage output for those masteries. All right. The main boss for the event quest Enter the Cabal is going to be Red Skull. The big thing for him is going to be those local nodes and how they work with his actual abilities. So take a look at the local nodes. Adaptive basically is going to give him more physical resistance and energy resistance. Those buffs are going to be very important. He also has a special 2 bias. He's more defensive. He's immune to bleed, so don't use bleed champions against him or it's not going to be very effective. He builds up armor. His special attack 2 is unblockable. The first component is, and he increases power gain, and his shock is far more effective. Now going into his actual abilities here, when he uses a heavy and he's charging, he gains power. It's not super important for this fight. He also has the ability to have critical resistance and energy resistance. Again, not super useful for this fight in terms of mechanics. He also does reduce power gain for each debuff you have on you. He also gains a armor up buff whenever he gains a bar of power, and those will give him the most important factor, which is if you strike him when he's guarding, you will take direct damage based on the number of buffs he has, which is going to be immense, and you'll see this in the fight. This is what you do not want to do, is you do not want to attack his shield. Just to show you how much damage it does, I am going to attack his shield at the very beginning of this fight. Also kind of ignore that problem connecting, not super helpful. So right here, what you're actually going to want to do is basically guard against him and then do stun and then get your combo in. But you just saw there, when you attack his shield and he has buffs on, that's going to do massive amount of direct damage. So the strategy for this fight is going to basically be give him his first bar super and then dash backwards until you basically get him to activate his first super. His first super is completely dodgeable. We'll see it here shortly. He's basically going to do a teleportation attack, and you're going to have to wait for it after he punches downwards. So let's see it here briefly. For the baiting, and so this is going to be very, very important, you cannot do the strategy of hitting his shield. You have to just do the dash backward strategy. That's it. So right here, he does that kind of melee attack, dashes forward, and punches down. Now, for Red Skull, your biggest champions for beating him are going to be Doctor Voodoo and Magik. Also, you can have things like Ghost Rider, anything that's going to basically have debuff removal. The reason why Doctor Voodoo is better is because he puts poison counters on. So you see we have 14 poison counters on. We're doing 1,000 damage per second. You just saw a second super in case you do push him there. The only thing that's unblockable is the first component, so dash backwards. Then you dodge that Tesseract Blast, and then you can dodge the third component of it. Basically, you're just going to dash back continuously until that beam goes away. You also can just take the beam on your shield and kind of ignore it. The damage output's not severe, but you will take a fair amount of chip damage. It just depends on how you want to do it. So for the strategy, you're basically just going to be dodging the first super, dashing backwards, coming in right afterwards. When he doesn't have his bar of super energy, you can just parry him when he dashes in. The timing's a little bit wonky, so just make sure you're kind of watching that, and then doing a full combo afterwards. But don't push him to a second super, as it is much more punishing and it's very difficult to dodge. So I'd really recommend basically just doing the first bait super. Because you're trying to bait that first special attack, that's why Dr. Voodoo is so good, is that you can basically drop these massive poison counters on him, and additionally, you can use his third and second super to power control him. The other option for this is Magik. I'll also make another video for Magik. But for Magik, it's the same idea. You're going to basically use your second super to power control him, and then you use a third super to remove all of his buffs, and then do a massive amount of damage. I would recommend you do Magik's third super first just to remove all those buffs, but you can do either one. It doesn't really matter. Again, just remember you're going to have to bait that first super. The big thing that people are going to die on is that they use the strategy of attacking the shield and dashing back to bait the first super. If you do that, you'll basically kill yourself against his shield. So make sure that when you're baiting his first super, that you're dashing backwards instead, doing the kind of wait for him to attack you, then dash back, wait for him to attack you, then dash back. Don't do the attack his shield, then dash back, because you're going to get destroyed by that damage through the direct contact. As you see, this is a completely doable fight with Doctor Voodoo, especially if you had Mystic Dispersion. So how I'm getting these massive amounts of energy is Mystic Dispersion, but you don't need that. You can just use the first super over and over again and not even do the power control third super. I hope this video was helpful. Good luck with your Uncollected run-through. Take a look at the other videos for the bosses and other walkthroughs. I hope this was helpful, and please like and subscribe. Comment below for any other videos you would like to see. If you have any other suggestions or other tips that people could find helpful, there's always other strategies that I haven't covered. Thanks.